Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and whether that hot elven prince in the corner has a dark secret. At a corner table by the fire are two people. One of them is wondering why he keeps hearing the rumble of dragon sounds outside. And that's me, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to help connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories in order to understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. Now, as many of you know, probably because I keep talking about it, my middle grade fantasy novel, Red Rex, came out a few months ago with Bandersnatch Books. You can get Red Rex at Amazon, Bandersnatch website, write a review, you know all that stuff, whatever. Okay, where was I? Yes, several years ago, when I was working on what turned out to be an earlier version of Red Rex, I, for a while, thought it was going to be a YA, so young adult novel, instead of a middle grade novel. And of course, if you're going to write a book in the YA fantasy genre, you have to do market research. So over a period of several months, I, a grown man with a family, a job, and a mortgage, ended up reading an insane amount of books targeted at teenage girls. Now, granted, I wasn't exactly the target audience for these books, but I found them both strange and fascinating. A lot of dragons, a lot of magical or near magical powers, and a lot of teenage heroines who could kick anybody's butt and lead any revolution. That is, if she doesn't get distracted by that handsome bad boy who plays by his own rules and, twist, is secretly an elven prince. Now, eventually, I realized middle grade was a better fit for my writing, and turned out to be a good switch. But I still have not forgotten this weird world of YA fantasy. What's the appeal of it? Why does it have so many loyal readers? And what's been happening to the genre in the years since I switched over to middle grade? And why, oh why, are there so many hot elven princes? Now, our guest at the table today is just the person to ask. Her name is Sarah Hendricks, and she happens to be a YA fantasy author. She has a new book out. It is called Ella. It is available for purchase now. I highly recommend you all check it out. And I'm so happy to have her guide me through this strange world of YA fantasy. Sarah, welcome to the table.
Thank you so much, Matthew, and thank you for having me here on the Believe to See podcast. I am thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Well, we were talking in the green room before we started, but we met up through our mutual friend, a friend of the show, actually, Craig Knurr. You met him in college. I met him during some study abroad thing in college. He is a man of many talents. If y'all want to listen to Craig, go look to the episode we recorded about his work with the Catherine Project. But when he found out both of us had written books, obviously he got us together, and obviously he was like, well, we need to talk about all this YA fantasy stuff. So I'm very happy to have you at the table. Before we really dive into the YA stuff, though, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, thanks. I grew up in Connecticut, so New Englander at heart. I currently live in Texas. I met my husband in Massachusetts, where we both went to college. And when we got married, we wanted to move somewhere south. He's from Texas, so that's where we live. I, in college, got a music education degree, which makes total sense because now I'm a writer, as we do. So yeah, I live in this house here with my husband and my 3 sons. So I'm just kind of outnumbered and loving every minute of it.
Hashtag boy mom. All right.
Yes.
So one quick question, because I do wonder about this sort of thing. So your background in music, do you feel, I don't know, sense of rhythm, sense of melody, that this helps you in your writing at all? Or am I just making up stuff?
You are not making stuff up at all. I definitely think It's funny. I have been thinking about how many artists and writers and everybody in that like Enneagram 4 category kind of have all this crossover where they're an author but they also sing, or they are a singer-songwriter but they also are really really good at drawing. So I definitely think we kind of fall in that self-expression category. So it's funny because some of my favorite scenes to write from my book were in a bar called Marilla's. And so I would just kind of hear folk music in my head, and that totally inspired some of those scenes. So I definitely think that there's a thing with the music and the crossover into the writing.
All right, I love the multidisciplinary stuff. That is really great to hear. So now let's talk about your book, Ella, which is being published by Pegasus Publishers, which I believe is out of Cambridge. Did I get that right?
It is Cambridge, England.
Okay, how did you find them?
I was searching on a writing website, taking in all of my options, learning about what to do if you want to get an agent or a publisher, and an advertisement of theirs actually popped up. And they looked awesome. So I sent them a query letter.
Well, there we go. There we go. If only all of our stories could have that sort of but I'm guessing you had a lot of turmoil in the process between A and B as well. But
oh yeah, we all put our work out there for the critics. Yes.
Yeah. So eventually you do it. You find the right place. So you get this published. Your book is called Ella. So now's your chance, right? This is what your training's for. What's your elevator pitch? What is Ella about?
Thank you so much for asking. Ella is a coming of age story about a soon to be princess, Elf. And the book starts with her having one disastrous weekend where the prince she's engaged to calls off their engagement, and her best friend gets kidnapped by evil forces in the Elvish realm, which is called Alveland. So Ella is not the kind of girl to sit around and wait for the men to do the work. So she makes a plan to go get Megs. And so she decides to try to convince the most elite group of Elvish fighters to take her with them to go find Megs. And this, of course, requires the cooperation of Oliver, the general, who is her boy next door childhood friend. He's very grumpy, but also kind of distractingly handsome. So
ain't that the way?
Ain't that the way? Yes. So Ella is permitted to join the hunters, but with the stipulation that she has to train with them. So she has to go through Elvish hunter training. And during that training, Ella learns that the problem is much bigger than just Megs is kidnapped. There is evil in Alveland, and a lot of it depends on Ella. So she has this unique opportunity to challenge herself, risk everything to restore life and freedom to those she loves.
Well, there you go. That was great. All right. So there we have it. You see, obviously you are familiar with this genre, right? So my question is, when did this start? Are you a lifelong YA fantasy fan, or did you stumble upon this later?
I remember the moment. I wanted to hang out with one of my very best friends. We were in 6th grade, and I believe Harry Potter 4 had just come out. And so I called her up. Her name is Beth. I said, Beth, do you want to hang out today? And she said, no, I am going to get Harry Potter 4 because it comes out today. And so I was a little hurt, right? Like, okay, my 6th grade girl pride was dashed. But she said, you can come with
You
me.
were rejected for a book. I mean, come on.
Yes, I was rejected for a book. But she said, you know what? My dad won't care. You can come along. We'll get you Harry Potter 1. And I mean, that was the moment. And I think J.K. Rowling showed me the depth of imagination and world building that an author can have. And I was just completely swept away.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my start of getting into YA fantasy. Harry kept me company. Beth ended up moving away that summer. So Harry kept me company, and I looked forward to, I read 1 through 4 without taking a breath and waited impatiently for each book after that to come out. So that was, Harry Potter was the start. And then I had the opportunity to read Lord of the Rings as I went through high school. I really wanted to read before I watched the movies. Does that tell how old I am, that the movies came out when I was in high school? Whatever. And then I didn't read the Chronicles of Narnia until I was in college.
Oh man.
But I know. So it was really unique being kind of at the edge of my childhood, and I hadn't gotten married. I hadn't had any kids. So I also wasn't reading Narnia through the lens of a parent. So I was just a little of both, a little bit of a kid and a little bit of an adult. And so I think it was a really unique time that I got to read it. But those were the 3. Harry first.
So that is really interesting the way you put it. Those 3, because I feel like kind of like checking. So like you're about to make a chess move. You're like, am I about to make a mistake? I feel like those are the big 3, right? Like those 3 series. So Harry Potter, Narnia, and Lord of the Rings. Like those are the series. I feel like 100 years from now, people like us will be like, oh, those 3, right? So I feel like those are the 3 appropriate ones to start with. Absolutely. And especially something like Harry Potter. One of the many, many things I love about that series is it kind of transitions midway through, because like the first Harry Potter is absolutely a middle grade novel, right? But then once you get to the last one, that's absolutely a YA novel. And then there's sort of this slow evolution in between. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of get, the middle grade folks like me and the YA folks like you can both find equal stuff in it. So then my question is, so you start with those 3, which again, perfect place to start. But then the contemporary YA fantasy world, right? That the one specifically that seems really laser focused on, like teenage, college age girls. When did you first get into that particular subgenre of this?
The answer might actually be that I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are so many emerging subgenres of YA fantasy right now, including, but not limited to, historical fantasy, high fantasy, low fantasy, dark fantasy, steampunk, mm-hmm. which is a thing, and magical realism, and there are more. And so I have tried to read several from all of those different titles. I think probably the girliest I got was Twilight. I mean, that's girly, right? Not that men didn't enjoy it and enjoy the movies because there was fighting and stuff, but I feel like definitely those swoony romances. I loved Twilight. I did try to get into some of the dark fantasy, which I think is really popular, and it's just not my jam. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's part of what led me down the road to write a bit of a lighter one on my own is because maybe I didn't find what I was looking for after Twilight and after Harry and Lord of the Rings and Narnia.
So that is interesting because, again, that's something like, for me, who has more of a, surface level knowledge of the genre, that you break it down. It's not just YA fantasy. There's all these, micro genres, right? So of those, which would you say Ella fits into?
I would say Ella fits most comfortably in the high fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So high fantasy means that the majority of the story takes place in a fictional world, whether or not our world exists, which it does in Ella. But the majority of it takes place in Alveland. So I would say that most comfortably it would fit in that high fantasy. I think that there's a big nod to romantasy as well, because it does have that strong romance subplot. Mm-hmm. Fun fact is that I actually wrote the romance first.
Huh.
So, I hadn't even fully fleshed out the main plot of the book yet. I just knew, I knew of Ella from one of my previous stories that I had written. And I liked her spirit so much that I wanted to write her story. And, these people become figments of our imagination, and then they become characters in our book. So Oliver was a figment of my imagination, and I knew he would be perfect for Ella. And so started to kind of write out their story first, and the rest of the main plot came along as well.
That is interesting, and that I will say my writing style is completely different. One of the reasons I like middle grade so much better is I am not comfortable with any of my characters being romantic with each other. Nope, all of you, back away. Hey, get away. None of that.
I love it.
One of our authors here at the Anselm Society, Evangeline Denmark, co-host of the show when she's able to find the time. She also writes YA fantasy too. I should actually connect you to, but she was telling me about how awkward she felt writing like the first kissing scene in her book. Like, I don't know, their lips press into, I don't know, but you started with the romance, then went to there, and again, I would be hard pressed to find one of these books in this subgenre that doesn't have a romance as at least the most important subplot. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. But doesn't that speak to our audience?
I mean, exactly. I'm writing for 12-year-old boys. You're writing for teenage. Like there's a reason why I ended up where I did, right?
Yes.
That makes total sense. And let's also get into some of the world building here, because there really is a wide variety of world building within what I think we could call YA fantasy. Because there's like what you said, the high fantasy, where again it's an other world. There'd be an element of like the Fae, right? Like what I take your elven world, like basically you're talking about fairies from like in the Irish tradition, like the Fae. It's just you're using elven terms. Am I tracking with you on that one?
It is definitely from Nordic mythology. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about elves, as we do when we're fiction authors. We think about elves. And when I was writing my first draft of Ella, I was realizing that what the world was like in my imagination was not coming out on the page. So what I did was I took a break and I researched a little bit about elves, as we do when we're fiction authors. And so that lands you in Iceland. Mm-hmm. And I am completely enamored by Iceland. It is on my bucket list to go visit after writing this book. And I found myself looking at photography, Icelandic photography, landscapes from Iceland with the Northern Lights, and it is so gorgeous. And so I knew at that point that I wanted Alvaland to have Icelandic vibes.
Yeah.
So it came from like the smallest bit of writer's block and then a deep dive into elves, and I found Iceland, and that really helped me be able to bring what was in my imagination onto the page for the world building.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. First of all, listeners, it's a good tip. If you ever find yourself stuck or writer's block, maybe go down a Wikipedia wormhole. You know, might be helpful. But also just this idea, and again, that this would be a good characteristic of high fantasy, right? It has these sort of other folks. Again, if you're telling an Irish story, you'd call them the Fae, but it's Nordic, Icelandic inspired, so they're going to be elves, so that they fill similar roles, right? But then there's other subgenres of this as well. I read a lot that took place kind of like in the future, but it's a future where conveniently we don't have guns so much, and like it's almost like a fairy world. Like I read I actually really enjoyed this one. It was a series called The Lunar Chronicles, where it was retelling sort of classic fairy tales, but in like a sci-fi setting, which was actually kind of interesting. There's other ones where, yeah, it's almost slight sci-fi, slight dystopian, but still hits a lot of the same vibes. What you also mentioned dark YA. What do you mean by that genre? Because I feel like I have a vague idea. Like I could probably, if you took me to a bookstore, I could pick out the ones that fit the category, but I would have trouble describing it.
Absolutely. I think dark young adult fantasy is becoming so popular, rising to the surface right now. It is a story in which good and evil is a little bit blurred, and it's sometimes even told from the villain's perspective. So the villain kind of becomes the hero of the book. So I think these, in my opinion, I think that they can be really cool for youths to discuss, especially with a trusted teacher or guide. Such good discussions as they're wrestling with right and wrong and developing their beliefs. I think the only part that was kind of hard for me is that I found that the particular books that I read had a little too much gore for me. So that's just not my jam. So I would kind of get totally lost in the story, and then I would flip really fast through the part that kind of grossed me out, and then I would get lost in the story again.
Yeah, and that's actually a relevant point, because again, through my diving through the genre, these books were not especially tame, right? Like you see a lot of violence. Oftentimes, like I'm currently reading Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, right? Like, so like I can handle violence, but some of it was like, oh gosh, okay. A lot of kind of disturbing premises. There's even quite a few that push the envelope in terms of like sexual situations too. Like it is no longer, if it ever was the case, it's no longer the case you should assume like, oh, YA, it's safe. Like there's really edgy varieties of that. And to your point about the sort of the dark subgenre, it sounds like what you're saying is, if used prudently, that you can find a lot of value there. But it sounds like there's also ways that it can veer into the imprudent. Am I tracking you on that one?
I think that's a great way to put it. Yes, but I mean, it's in the same way that some of the classic literature is also full of darkness and violence. And so I'm so thankful that my kids read them either with my husband and myself or a trusted teacher at their school.
So it's a whole big multifaceted thing that we're talking about. And now let's get to the issue of the appeal, right? Because these books are very popular. They have a very loyal readership that's pretty consistent and has been consistent for quite a while now. What do you think is the appeal, especially, key target demographic would be a bookish teenage girl. Why do they keep gravitating to this type of book in particular, you think?
Well, I know why I liked it. And that is because I just loved using my imagination. I loved getting lost in the vibrant YA worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely loved getting to escape from reality a little bit for a little while. So I think that there are even some deeper layers too, some reasons why they appeal to my 16-year-old self and all of the young readers. I think that it's imaginative literature. I think that there are incredibly satisfying heroes and heroines. I think magic is an appeal. I also think going back to that world building, I think that's huge. But I think that deeper layer might be that these imaginary worlds give us some good commentary on the world in which we live.
Mm.
And last, I think that this is kind of teaching us to use our sacred imaginations, which I can unpack a little bit.
Oh, please do. Unpack.
Okay, so this is something that I totally heard Malcolm Guite talk about. And he talks about, in one of his podcast interviews, he talks about art as a bigger thing, tilling the soil and getting our imagination ready for faith. And I think that the young adult fantasy genre can do that so well. It gets us ready to believe in something bigger than ourselves that we can't see. And I think that young adult fantasy appeals to that God-shaped hole in every person by nurturing our sacred imagination. And I think that's so special.
That's a really good way to put it. It made me think of a point that Andrew Peterson made along similar lines. We had him out for an Anselm conference a few years ago, and Andrew Peterson, again, friend of the show, writer of the Wingfeather Saga. Listeners, you know this, right? But he made this point about when he was growing up, when he was like a teen, he read all these really kind of crappy fantasy books, right? You know, like the Dungeons and Dragons knockoffs, right? So he was like, yeah, these books weren't good, right? There's always some sort of orb in the fate of the world rested on capturing the orb from like the goblins or whatever. But he was like, even though those particular books weren't good in and of themselves, they still, like you said, tilled the soil for him later on. So if even not good fantasy books could do that, how much more could a really well done and well written YA fantasy do that, right? It can really, it can get things prepared. How did you say it? The sacred imagination, right? So
gets us ready.
There you go. So with that in mind, let's talk about how you incorporated this into your book, Ella. So you made it seem like your book wasn't exactly like directly in response to like dark fantasy or high fantasy, but it was sort of, it had a lot of those elements in mind. What was going on with that while you were writing the book?
Yeah. So my goal in writing Ella was really to write an entertaining story. And I pushed against that, right? You know, we start writing before we have a plan. Mm-hmm. But once I kind of had the idea and the concept of Ella, I asked myself why I was writing this. And so I came down to, I really want to write an entertaining story. And when I stopped pushing against that, that was because it's a big part of who I am. I love comedy and making people smile and laugh. And I have just recently started to kind of accept that as a strength of mine. So I wanted to tell a good story so that it would be quality literature.
Mhm.
I think a piece of quality literature has to have a good story. And the themes are kind of given that they're going to be there in a piece of quality literature. So, quality literature is entertaining while at the same time being somewhat disarming. And again, this is something I think is a strength in young adult fantasy, that the story is so entertaining, it can provide a particularly safe space to introduce those themes because they're there if you're ready.
Mhm.
And if you're more ready to just get into the wizard's duel or the orbs or the whatever it is, you can do that too. So you can deal with them when you're ready, I feel like, in young adult fantasy. So the themes that I think are particularly hopeful in Ella is forgiveness and beauty and self-sacrifice.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to put it, because you are right that I think it's very common for a lot of writers to have it in their head like, oh no, it can't just be entertaining, right? Because those are the books I'm supposed to make fun of, right? No, we don't do that. But first of all, there's nothing wrong with being entertaining, right? And second, if a book is entertaining, if it's engrossing, if the readers really enjoy it, they want to get lost in the world, it's more immersive. That's the situation when they're already immersed in something where the messages can actually do the most work, right? So then the key is make sure the messages are worthwhile. So to that point, these messages that you mentioned, did you kind of have them in mind as you're writing it, or did you write the first draft and you're like, oh, look at these messages that I put in, let's polish those a bit?
That is a great question. I believe it was the second one. When I started writing, that was actually in 2011, before I had any of my kids, and I was particularly inspired by J.K. Rowling. I feel like she writes a lot about human rights in her stories. So I think I kind of set out with the idea of doing something like that, but it wasn't until I got to know the characters and the story that I could see the themes emerging. So I think it was in the drafting process that I started to bring them out more.
Mhm. No, that makes perfect sense. And I've heard that from several writers, where it's like you get the story out, and it's almost like your subconscious was working on this, and then you see it on the paper. It's like, oh, well, look at this theme. Okay, cool. So that's one of the themes now. Then like through later drafts, you're working it in. So that's really fascinating. So, question for you now. We're running a little low on time, but do you have a second book in the works? Do you have other projects? What's next for you, or is this one's just out? So we'll worry about this one for now.
No, um I think it was the day that I signed my contract to publish Ella, I started book 2, which is about her best friend that was kidnapped. And you know, we authors, we take a deep dive into lots of things. So another deep dive that I took was actually into my own storyline that I started in 2011. So if things go according to the way they are in my imagination, the first story that I wrote in 2011 can be book 3.
Oh,
We'll see.
hey, I like it. I like it. I'm actually doing something very similar with mine right now, where it's like I start off with a super long book, then I chop it in half. It's like, this is book 2, and then it's like, actually, it's book 3. But yeah, I'm very happy to hear that is your approach as well. So that is super exciting. So once again, listeners, we are running low on time, but the author is Sarah Hendricks. The spelling, because multiple Sarah spellings, Sarah. Hendricks is Hendricks. The book is Ella, Ella. So please take a look at that. And Sarah, where else can we find you? Where else can we find your work?
You can find me on Instagram at elvish_storybook. You can find me on my website, sarahhendricks.org. Thank you for spelling that out, Matthew. And author Sarah Hendricks on Facebook. You can buy Ella at your favorite local or online bookstores. That includes Amazon. And you can also find it on Pegasus Publishers' website.
Awesome. Awesome. Well,
thank you so much for having me, Matthew.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And listeners, as you can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire's down to embers. The customers are trundling home. You're about to wander off into the Fae territory. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. If you have an extra, 15 seconds or so, please rate and review this show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.